Alrighty, I do believe that we are successfully recording now. So Dark Bleatings, everyone. I'm really delighted today because I'm here with Ramsey Campbell, who I and many others consider one of the greatest of all time in horror fiction, or a GOAT, if you will. He is the winner of numerous literary awards and a prolific writer of over 30-ish novels, about 30 short story collections, I think, non-fiction.
Yeah, something like, yeah.
And you've edited a lot of work as well. So welcome, Ramsey. Thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited to have you on the channel.
Oh, thanks for having me, Kaylee. Thank you.
So I have some general bookish questions, some questions about your work, and then also I put out the option to ask questions to people who follow Happy Goat Horror on social media. So I do have some audience questions as well. I would like to start with your most recent short story collection,
Okay.
Fearful Implications from PS Publishing. I bought this from you at FantasyCon last year.
Ah, right, okay.
You kindly signed it for me as well. I love PS Publishing, put out the most beautiful covers, in my opinion.
Yes.
I was having a look at your back catalogue of short story collections. I haven't managed to read them all yet because you've written quite a lot, so I'm making my way through your back catalogue, but I have been scared by your work since I was a teenager. The very first book of yours I read was The Grin of the Dark.
Okay, yes.
And I remember my reading experience because I was really scared. And I wondered, with short story collections, I think somewhere in the region of 30 collections surely must be some sort of record in publishing. Is there something about short fiction that you like in particular when you're writing horror as opposed to long form?
Well, I mean, I like both. But I mean, I started writing short stories way before I completed the novel. So really, actually, although I had a couple of very abortive stabs at novels when in my early teens, actually, I sort of landed on the short story as being what I could do better in my mid-teens, in fact, imitating Lovecraft to begin with. And it wasn't until 14 years after my first novel came out that, I beg your pardon, 14 years after my first short story was published that my first novel came out. So I've had a lot of experience in doing it. And I actually do think, I'll get to your question in a moment because I know I'm rambling slightly off the subject here, but I do feel it's a good apprenticeship to have. Maybe don't attempt a novel until you've to some extent got familiar with the techniques of a short story. And I think it's basically because I have so many, well, Lord, I've got so many ideas. I will never, I guarantee it, have time to do them all, because I always carry notebooks like so. I use my phone as a notebook often enough these days, but, still carry those things too. And, I really have got hundreds of unused ideas, and some of them are going to languish in the notebooks, and someone can have them after I've, gone away and can't get to them. So I would never want to abandon writing short stories simply because I think it's a different experience, it's a different process. But specifically, it's a more compact, if you like, perhaps a more intense narrative. And I think a lot of people have said it is ideal for horror, particularly supernatural horror. Or the novella also is a pretty good form for that. But I also love writing novels, even though they're more discursive. But I think a novel has to be about more than simply horror. I mean, I don't really think I've done a novel which pursues horror single-mindedly in the way a lot of the short stories do. So it is about the average novel, average horror novel. Is about a lot more than simply the horror at its centre, or the whatever it may be, the monster, the uncanny. Although there very probably may be a sense of that running through the story. That certainly is something I try to do. But I suppose the most honest answer to your question probably is that it's easier to do that in a short story. It's actually easier to sustain it And that's one of the reasons why I carry on doing it. But the other reason is, you know, I get a lot of short story ideas, and there's a huge difference between a short story idea and a novel idea. And I mean, you know, the idea has got to be, you know, substantial enough that you can develop it at novel length in some way. And you know, the majority of my ideas are not that. So that's why I write short stories still. But I never want to give them up, sure.
Yeah, I love a short story, a good short story collection. I think that is quite a good distinction. So where you said novels have to be about something more than just the scary concept, because you can execute a really good scary idea in a short amount of time in a short story. But yeah, supposed to keep people engaged in a novel, you need a lot more going on. Are you usually ahead ideas wise? You normally have a few ideas banked when you're currently working on something for the next
Lord, yes. I mean, you know, even more than that, whenever I'm working on a novel, you know, some stage of that process, as I am now, actually, I mean, I'm rewriting the first draft of what will presumably be next year's novel. But I want to know now what the novel I'm going to write next is going to be about, and because it's a sort of reassurance, actually. I nearly always do know that these days. I do in fact know what the one, you know, next down the line is going to be about, even probably what it's going to be called. I shall tell you, in fact, here's the world premiere. Here we go. Next, the novel, not next year's novel, which is An Echo of Children. That's the one that should come out next year, but the one that will presumably come out, you know, even further into the future. At the moment, anyway, the title is The Ancestral, which I kind of like. I mean, I fiddled around and piddled around, you know, for quite a bit before I came up with that. But at the moment, that's what it's likely to be called.
Oh, I'm looking forward to those. I'm terrible with titles. That is not a strong point of mine. For entitling stories, but
well, it can take work, you know. Sure, I mean, I often it'll be, you know, I want to know what a book is called before, or a story, you know, before I start writing it. I need to have a title, but sometimes I will change it, you know, in the course of writing the story. I'll think, no, hang on, that's a better title. I'll use that, but I always need a fallback at the very least.
Yeah, a little backup title.
That's right.
When you're getting ready to write a novel or just a longer piece of work, do you typically start with like plot or character, or do you have a typical approach?
No, the answer. I think it probably varies. I mean, sometimes the idea can generally speaking, the idea will generate a lot of developments for a novel, you know. But I don't plot in advance. What I do is I gather a lot of material. Again, you know, one of these notebooks I was showing you, maybe more than one of them. I don't know, but you know, there'll be. I don't know, about 50 pages maybe of ideas of developments and little notes for particular scenes and, you know, characters, certainly, obviously. I mean, there's that terrible limbo I find whenever I'm developing a novel in particular, much more the short story, because, you know, you obviously need more material, where, you know, I don't know what the characters are called, I don't know what they do in life, I don't know where they live, and until I get, you know, somehow, somewhere, you know, the names come to me eventually, and then usually what they do, well, unless they don't work, you know, they might be retired or they might be out of work, but in general, my characters, you know, do some kind of work, and usually that arises partly out of the situation, that, you know, I want some kind of work that is in some way not necessarily directly relevant to what the book is about, but some sort of job, everyday, you know, occupation that will help shine a perspective. I'm ruining my metaphors here, but, you know, shine a light on the theme of the book. So, I'm trying to think of a good example, really. Well, I guess, you know, The Lonely Lands, which was last year's novel from Flame Tree, that's very much about the influence of the past, and the central couple run, you know, a sort of well, not so much an antique shop as a memorabilia shop, you know, with lots of stuff from the past and nostalgic stuff, and that was very, you know, that became very relevant to what the story was about. And until I knew that, I couldn't really move ahead with developing the book. You know, long before I started writing it, I need that sort of information about them. And you know, it's just a matter of, it's just, with me at least, it's just a matter of kind of, you know, constantly living with the idea of the novel and letting it, letting the, to some extent, letting the subconscious come up with the material. And you know, if you trust it, I found it will. But you know, it took some time to trust it. You know.
Yeah, I think that's an enormous part of the process that a lot of people don't realize before you even get to writing the book, is the amount of research and prep you have to do beforehand. And presumably, yeah, if you've got characters with jobs that you yourself haven't worked, and you need to look into those jobs. And a lot of that information doesn't even end up in the book. It's just the character, though.
That's right. I mean, you have to know what to leave out as well as what to put in. I think that's true, but you need to know it in order to be able to leave it out.
Yeah. Do you spend, how much time roughly would you say you spend on that part of the process, on like the research and prep?
Well, months at least, you know, because I'm doing that right now for the Ancestral while I work on this present rewrite of the first draft of, you know, this, what is now the current novel in process or in progress. And you know, off and on. So I mean, it's a relatively non-intensive process. I can just come back to it at odd moments and you know, just think about it in a general sort of way, and ideas will eventually suggest themselves. And so you know, I've already worked up a fair number of ideas that I'm going to incorporate in this novel when I start writing it, presumably later in this year.
Yeah, it's a crazy amount of work before you even get to enjoy the writing process.
Yes. I mean, obviously, I have to know, whilst I don't plot in advance, I obviously have to know the sort of, you know, have an idea of a few of the major events of the narrative. And also, obviously, before you can start writing, or certainly for me, I need to know the order of the first few events. Otherwise, you know, I don't know where to start. So I want some sense of progression before I, you know, that first day's writing, and then in you go, basically, and trust yourself.
It's interesting to hear you say that you don't plot, because I assumed that you were a plotter because your novels come together so beautifully at the end. They're so tight.
Well, you see, that's it. I mean, I genuinely believe in the sort of organic growth of a novel, and that gives, for me anyway, that gives a sort of logic of structure that, you know, much more than I used to, really. I think that, you know, things happen because of what precedes them in my novels these days. And I have to tell you, though, about endings. I generally don't know what the ending is going to be until I'm almost on top of it. I mean, again, I might have a sort of fallback idea of an ending if nothing better suggests itself, but nearly always the act of writing the novel takes me away from what I had originally in mind as an ending. And well, usually, you know, what the book itself comes up with is better than what I had in mind in the first place.
I love that that sort of idea, well, not an idea, but like reality for writers, where I know a lot of people that read but they don't write do not understand the notion that the writer doesn't always know where the story's going. And you're typing away and it sort of like comes to you as you're going along. And especially with character deaths, when authors say, oh, I didn't actually plan to kill that character, but it just happened.
Yes.
People, what do you mean it just happened? You killed them. And it's like, well, didn't know I was going to do it.
Well, perfectly true. Perfectly true. Yeah.
If I could ask you a little bit about your experience in the industry, because you've, I would consider you a staple of the horror genre, and I'm sure many others do. And you've been in horror publish. Well, not, I don't want to keep just saying horror, but I think of you as a horror author.
Well, sure, so do I. So don't worry about that.
Okay, good. Yeah, some people don't like to be boxed in, but yes, you've got decades of experience.
60 years, 60 years, man and boy. Yes, that's right.
That's such a long time to be involved in the horror community, and I was just wondering if it's changed a lot since you first started publishing, and now, and if it has, how you think it's changed over time.
Publishing, you say? Do you mean?
Yeah, yeah, horror literature.
Oh, well, gosh, I mean, well, when I started out, I was published by Arkham House, August Derleth's publisher, which, he and Donald Wandry originally set up to publish Lovecraft. All they wanted to do was do a memorial volume because Lovecraft had just died. And then they decided, well, they could do more. And they started, collecting various authors originally from Weird Tales magazine. Later on, I mean, they actually specialized in first collections. So, they have the first Ray Bradbury's first book, which incidentally, I don't know if you noticed this, Dark Carnival, which was Bradbury's first collection, has just been reprinted by HarperCollins. So if you don't have
really?
it's now out there, which is useful. So I wanted to tell everybody about that in case they don't know.
Just writing it down so I don't forget to order it.
You bet, you bet. It's only just come out, so don't worry. But I mean, Arkham House was at that time one of the when I came into the business, I mean, which was the early 1960s, very early 1960s. Arkham House was really pretty well the only publisher that was doing horror and fantasy in a big way, consistently and publishing very little else, a little bit of science fiction. And I was lucky, hugely lucky, in selling my first stories to August Derleth. And they were, Lovecraft imitations, and that was partly why I bought them, I'm sure, because it was, a Lovecraftian publisher, and he himself had been writing a lot of Lovecraft pastiches. But in fact, as it turned out from our correspondence, just around that time, he felt he'd kind of exhausted himself in that direction. So I think, he welcomed somebody else coming along who appeared to be able to do the same sort of thing, given what I certainly needed, a lot of editorial advice. But still, he was able to publish that first book of mine. So a new Lovecraftian book, and I think that was very welcome to him as well. So as I say, that was he was Arkham House, which was really August Derleth all by himself, really, editorially certainly. What was just about the only real outlet for hardcover horror publishing at that time. It wasn't really until the 70s. In the mid-70s, well, along comes Jim Herbert. I mean, well, obviously, we'd had Rosemary's Baby, we'd had The Exorcist, but along comes Jim Herbert, along comes Steve King. And obviously, all of a sudden, the field explodes. And clearly, every publisher goes, well, by God, this stuff sells after all. And so you get this enormous boom of horror, which lasts from the early through mid-70s, really into the end of the 80s. And then things start to implode. For whatever reason, I don't know. All I do know, is the publishers, my editors, my agents were saying, well, it doesn't sell any longer. You're going to have to do something else, which was unwelcome, to put it mildly. But the thing was, I had written a few books that you could call crime fiction. I mean, I still say they're horror, but they'd had nothing supernatural in them. I mean, something like The Face That Must Die, for instance. I mean, I still very much regard that as a horror book in all sorts of different ways, but you could market that as crime. But the difference in the mid-90s, when horror ceased to be commercially viable for a while, was that I was now having to do it, under duress. I much prefer doing a crime horror novel when I felt like it, when that was the idea that came along next. But all of a sudden, I was being forced to generate these things. Now, I mean, I can't write anything that doesn't engage my imagination. I found that out long ago. So, I had to find stories that would do that, even though they were technically not horror or could be, marketed as not horror. And I did those for a few years, well, through the mid to late 90s. And then, well, it was my American editor, actually, Melissa Ann Singer over at Tor Books. And I was at a convention. Where was I? Oh, Niagara Falls, by God, that was memorable. And I was doing a sort of guest of honor talk on the stage. I was actually being interviewed by Caitlin Kiernan. And somebody from the audience, I think, said, aren't you going to do any more supernatural horror? And I said, well, Melissa, can I do one? And she's like, oh, go on. So, at that moment, I came back in and I wrote The Darkest Part of the Woods. So, and that
love that book.
Oh, thank you very much.
It's in one of my.
Yeah, there it is. Yes.
Campbell's.
That's the very edition, you see, that Melissa encouraged me to do. Yes, that's right. Melissa was the editor on that. And so that from that point onward, again, I've just done what I want to do. And I mean, I'm in a hugely lucky position with that, because I mean, to be honest, I don't. I think it would be probably true to say that if I never wrote another word, Jenny and I would still be comfortable, for the rest of our lives. We could live reasonably comfortable, even if I didn't sell anything else, which sort of frees me to write whatever I want to write.
Yeah.
And more to the point, though, I thought, rather, I don't, there was a time when you would get contracts in advance. You get a 3-book contract, which is a great boon in some ways. I've also seen, alas, some writers kind of, cave in under the pressure of that. You've been paid in advance for 3 books. Then all of a sudden you think, well, I've got to write another 2 books,
Yeah.
And I would much rather these days just write whatever I write and then send it out to my agent, and see if anybody wants to publish it. I've got to tell you, and this is the absolute truth, I'm not making up. Whenever I do send a new novel in particular to my agent, I think either they're going to say, well, look, this is not what you do and this is not what we expect. Or they're going to say, well, you've just repeated yourself again. We've had too much of this. And it's only when they say, no, it's only, we like this, and I can breathe again, basically, and get sleep again. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was recently talking to Tim Levin about
Yes.
the pros and cons of being a full-time writer, and he said the upside outweighs any downsides by a lot, but also he's been living for years with no actual job security, because the publisher could always say, no, we don't want it.
Well, yes,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't considered that before. I think a lot of people think that if you're a full-time author, that you're just guaranteed to get your next book published, and that's probably true for very few writers in the world. Maybe Stephen King and.
Yes, well, I mean, it seems to be it seems to have been true for me, but I mean, my Flame Tree are very kind to me, and they so far they've published every novel I've done, since I took up with them, and that includes, I mean, Somebody's Voice, which I think all of us thought, well, that's not quite a horror novel, and so they marketed it as kind of psychological suspense. And actually, it was very controversial, and at the time when the early reviews came up on Goodreads, from the advanced reading copies, I'll tell you, I actually felt I wish I'd never written this book. So many people loathe it, they actively hate it. But then other reviews started coming in that were more positive, and and the Washington Post described it as one of my best books. So, who can tell? You've got to ride with that stuff, I think.
Yeah, I think you have to write what you want and then just see where your audience lands, because you never know, do you?
I don't know.
We could just talk about conventions for a second. I know that you attend a lot of them because I've seen you at them. In fact, the first time I met you was at ChillerCon, and it's an anecdote I tell people now about times that I've met people that I'm a big fan of and I've embarrassed myself.
Yes. I'll tell you an anecdote in a little bit, but you go on.
Yes, I can't imagine that you would remember this, but I was so shy I couldn't bring myself to come and talk to you. And it was right at the end of the last day, and I was with Justin Park, and he said, go on, you're gonna miss him if you don't talk to him now. So I came over to you with a little stack of books, and I was like, hello, Mr. Ramsey, can you please sign these books? And you did very kindly sign all my books, and you gave me some nice writing advice. It was a pleasure. And then obviously I saw you at FantasyCon last year, and that just turned into me waffling about the times I've been excited to talk to you at conventions. Sorry. I wanted to ask you, what do you enjoy about conventions, and do you have a favorite one? Do you go overseas for them?
Oh, not so much anymore. We used to. I mean, I do like the Stoker cons, I mean, and it is a good excuse to visit America, of course. And whenever it ends up in New Orleans, which is one of my favourite cities, a great place to eat apart from anything else, then that's a particular pleasure. But obviously, seeing all these guys, and seeing friends you may not have seen, since the previous convention. Whether in England, I'm in FantasyCon, I'm there every year pretty well. Jenny and I are. America, sadly, not so much anymore. I suppose, you know, as we dodder more, you know, we'll travel less. But well, we've still got a few years of that yet, I think. But no, you know, meeting friends. But yeah, meeting folk like you, Kayla. You know, meeting readers, because that's what makes it worthwhile for me.
Mhm.
You are the people who do it. You know, that's basically it. And
Yeah,
meeting is the best part of it, really.
For anyone who enjoys reading but has never attended one of these conventions in the UK, it is a really great place to meet authors that you like and have books signed and meet other readers and fans of the things you like. ChillerCon was my first ever bookish convention, so I was walking around like, oh,
Yes.
embarrassed myself in front of everyone I met. Mick Garris, I just rambled about the giant critter ball from Critters 2.
Yes,
I
yes.
swear I had smart questions to ask him, but that's all that came out.
Yes, yes.
And yeah, they're very I would describe them as cozy events where everyone just socializes with everyone, and it's I always spend way too much money on books.
Oh yes, there's that. There's that
It's your
too.
fault a lot of the time, Ramsey. I
Yes.
go by the flame tree table and I'm like,
Yes.
oh no, I'm gonna have to break my rule.
Yes, 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 absolutely. Well, I was going to tell you an anecdote now, just to make you feel better. Well, I hope you don't feel bad anyway, but
Okay.
this was way, oh lordy, I mean, 30 years ago, something like this, and it was Forbidden Planet, the bookshop, you know. Actually, it was the one, when, I forget what the street was now, but just around the corner from Centre Point in London, and they had two signings. I forget which way around it was. Oh, yes, I'll tell you what it was. I think it was J.G. Ballard in the morning, me in the afternoon. And you know, so there was a break between the two. Obviously, Malcolm Edwards at I think he was then at Golank, you know, said, "Look, yeah, come on, I'll introduce you to Jim Ballard." So you know, he took me up to this guy, and I said, so basically, "Hello, Mr. Ballard." And presumably he thought, who's this rude bugger? I've never heard of him, you know. And why isn't he talking to me? Because I just froze up, you know. There was too much I wanted to say and not enough time to say it. You know, I was just in awe of this extraordinary writer. So that was the end of that. That was my meeting with J.G. Ballard. That's the whole of my meeting with J.G. Ballard. Although we were in a book later on, I actually did the introduction, so I was able to, you know, to refer to this meeting and say, you know, well, I hope you didn't feel I was too dreadfully rude, you know. So maybe read that and realised, I don't know. But on the other hand, you see, when we come to things like I suppose I'm thinking particularly now of the World Fantasy Conventions and the early ones. I mean, the first one I was at. And you know, here I am meeting people like Fritz Leiber and Robert Bloch and Frank Belknap Long, you know, Manly Wade Wellman, where I went to stay with Manly and Francis in Chapel Hill, and Carl Edward Wagner, well, of course, he's more of my generation, sadly gone now, and, you know, Charlie Grant, and you know, innumerable other people, but particularly these, you know, these legends from the past. And this was just an extraordinary experience, and they all became friends later on. I mean, Fritz, like, well, the following year actually in New York, Fritz and I did a reading together at Jack Sullivan's apartment in New York, because you know Jack always had me to stay, me and Jenny, and I would always do a reading for his friends. And I think it was Jenny actually who said to Jack, you know, would you mind if we bring a guest along for dinner? And Jack said, oh, I'm sure that's okay. Who is it going to be? Fritz Leiber. So you know, his jaw dropped, and so Fritz duly came for dinner, and then we did a reading together, and I think that was a memorable occasion for sure.
Yeah, the getting to meet. I have always personally found authors as a whole to be very nice people to meet. They say don't meet your heroes, and
Yes.
I used to go to a lot of horror conventions and not book specific ones, and also like Walking Dead conventions and stuff. So I've also met a lot of actors, and I've been disappointed a few times by actors, but never a writer. People are always very welcoming and happy to talk to you and answer your questions, and yeah, it's a very nice experience as a reader and a big fan of horror fiction. And you were the first author in horror that I branched out from when I was just reading Stephen King.
Ah, right,
All the
okay.
women in my family are big horror fans and horror readers, and Stephen
Right.
King's like a staple in every house.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I was just reading Stephen King for years, and then I was like, oh, I'm gonna run out of books. I need to find some new authors, and
Yeah.
I randomly picked up The Grin of the Dark.
Ah, yes,
I was browsing a Waterstones, I think.
yes.
Picked this up, and then I was like, well, that's a new author for me
Mhm.
to enjoy, and I love it when that happens.
Yes, yes.
And yes, you kind of opened me up to the world of people who aren't Stephen King in horror, because I think a lot of people get their start in reading horror with earlier Stephen King works,
Oh,
but then
yeah.
backtracked and I read, well, not backtracked, but I was looking for authors of a around the same time period that this was published and a bit earlier. So I read some Robert Bloch and James Herbert,
Ah, very good,
um,
very good. Yes.
H.P. Lovecraft, and I recently read the Weird Tales Boys, the Stephen Jones.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, had a lovely education in that because I never read the magazine.
Sure, sure.
So
You can find it archived online now, I think, quite a few issues. Because, I mean, it's mostly, I suppose, technically out of copyright, so it's officially there.
yes, I found some in my research because I reviewed it for PS Publishing. So I
Oh,
was looking I
right.
was
Yes,
looking
of
for back
course.
issues then because it opened up this whole I was like, I need to read these magazines.
Yes, yes. Oh,
Yeah.
sure, indeed. Yeah, for
It's
certain.
it's love. I say I read widely. I mostly only read horror, but I try to read widely in horror. So I try to go from classics to contemporary, and
Sure, sure.
it's lovely to you've got books you've been publishing for decades, so um you're both a not like a you're not old enough to be a classic horror author, Ramsey, but you've got
Got to
older
die to do that.
you've got older works and contemporary works, so it's
Yeah,
it's,
yeah.
it's cool that you're in both brackets
Sure,
for
sure.
me. Do you have a personal favorite professional moment or career highlight?
Oh, gosh. Well, I mean, I suppose it would really be that first World Fantasy Convention as much as anything, and doing stuff alongside these great names from my, from my, well, not from my past exactly, but from my youth, because I've been reading them from very early on, because I was getting adult books out of the local public library on my mother's ticket with her, so her say so. Um,
Mhm.
and a fair number of these were from stories were anthologized from Weird Tales, or also from some of the science fiction magazines, but they tended toward horror. So I'd read Bob Bloch and Fritz Leiber and so forth, before I turned teenage, and actually to meet them, actually to be on stage with them, so
Mhm.
what was just extraordinary. So yeah, I suppose that era, and sadly, of course, most of them are now, well, pretty well, all of them are gone. And because oh dear me, there was a book called Arkham's Masters of Horror, which is one of the last books that Arkham House published. It was an anthology, basically, of stories by people who were associated with Arkham House. And quite recently, there was a Spanish translation, a beautiful book actually, and they sent me Julie sent me an author copy of it. And in the accompanying letter, I think they may even have put it on the title, but they said to Ramsey Campbell, the only living contributor to this book, which is a bit daunting, but there you are. So, and as somebody pointed out, well, there's a few of us actually. Steve Jones is another such, but we are very much the links between that era and this one, because we knew all those people. We met
Mhm.
them and hung out with them. And sadly, even most of us, like, Dennis Etchison and Charlie Grant and the like, Ray
Yeah,
Garton went the other day, and so there
yeah.
aren't many of us left.
I was sad to see that. I was sad to hear that news.
Mm,
Um, Steve Jones's anthologies have introduced me to a lot of horror authors that I
mm,
wouldn't have otherwise read. Probably,
yes.
he's another one I randomly picked up an anthology that he put together, and then from that moment, he was the first editor where if I saw edited by Stephen Jones, I'd buy the book
Yes.
just
Yes.
because he's very good at putting those collections together. Got a good eye for.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. What would you say currently is the best part of your job?
Oh, surprising myself, basically, which is something I try to do every day when I'm writing, particularly a first draft. I want to write. I mean, here at my desk, as you probably can see, and I want to write something each day that I didn't know I was going to write until I got to it. I want something to develop that it comes out of nothing but the process of writing. But I suppose more generally. As I think I said this already, but anyway, it's worth repeating. Engaging my imagination. I mean, if I can't do that, well, I can hardly expect to engage anybody else's. But it is that excitement of creation that's, I think, the great pleasure. But also, got to say, rewriting. I mean, these days, actually relentlessly rewriting is a real pleasure. Actually seeing how to improve the stuff and jettisoning stuff I don't need, even if it took me, most of a morning to write. Doesn't matter if it's not doing anything, out it goes. And there's a weird sort of pleasure in that somehow. Sadistic or masochistic? Well, you decide.
I enjoy editing also, just chopping out big bits with a red pen or
yes.
The notes next to my own work. If someone saw my editing notes and it was for someone else's book, you'd think I was really harsh, but I'll just have, this is rubbish. Why did you put this in here?
Yes.
But it is fun.
Yes.
Do you listen to music when you write?
Not while I write anymore. No, I used to for a while actually. But these days, I mean, the only thing I could really listen to would be, say, Baroque music, because anything later than that is too emotionally demanding. But these days, the more I hear of, somebody, well, Bach as being the classic example, classic instead of Baroque really, but is there's so much going on there that even that's going to distract me. I mean, I used to use music to some extent as a means of keeping myself here at the desk, so I wouldn't wander off. But these days, actually, I think I'm sufficiently disciplined not to need that, and also sometimes. Well, I mean, it's not writer's block, that's exaggerating, but sometimes I will hit a bit of a snag. I won't quite know what to do next. And if I just walk away for a few minutes, I'll find it's the old subconscious again. It will come up with a solution, and I'll know what to do when I come back here to write. And that's, I mean, one of the very few tricks I've learned in 60 years or more is I always compose at least the first sentence before I sit down to write, so I'm not stuck with staring at this blank page and having the blank page stare back at me. And that's for what it's worth for anybody who wants it. There's a trick.
That's a good tip. Going back quickly to what you said about that you don't plot everything in advance. Have you ever written yourself into a corner towards the end and been really stuck?
Yeah, on occasion I've felt that way. Yes, quite a number of times. I mean, gosh, which would I think of? The wise friend. I remember that sort of somewhere around the middle. I seemed to snag, and what it was that I had to think. Well, what's this book really about? And I thought about, well, surely what it's well, no, wait a minute. No, I beg your pardon, not the wise friend, the kind folk, and. What I thought here was, well, hang on. One of the things it must be about is his concern for his son, young son, and whether what this the supernatural, the magical element that has resurfaced in the story, how is that going to affect him? And once I saw that, I thought, well, obviously that's where we're going, and so the thing got back on track. But I do occasionally, yeah, you're right. I mean, particularly in a novel, find that I seem to be stranded out in the middle of nowhere, with no idea of how I got here and certainly no idea of where to go next. But I always find that if I look back over what I've already got, very often it's something I thought I'd just put in as a bit of background detail that turns out to be much more important and becomes the seed of where I need to develop the story. And so again, it's a matter of, I mean, I tend to feel that, my subconscious knows what it's up to even when I don't. And so I just have to, let it speak for itself somehow.
Yeah, it's writing a novel is a lot harder than I thought it was.
Mm.
I have been trying. I've written a lot of short stories, but and I think I'm approaching a place where I'm quite happy with my short stories now. But
Yeah.
I've been trying to write a novel for about 6 years,
Oh
and
gosh, yeah.
I think I'm going to take on board what you said about like the preparation and everything
Yeah.
beforehand, because usually what's happened is I've got 50,000 or so words in, and then I realize there's an enormous plot hole, and
Yeah.
it's not like fix. I can't go back through and fix it. Like I've completely annihilated the plot.
Yeah.
I've had to start again. So yeah, maybe if I the preparation bit, I'm just so excited to start the writing
Well,
process.
yes,
So I
sure. Yes, I know what you mean.
need to
Yeah.
exercise more patience, I think.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good idea.
Did you have a writing routine of any kind before you were a full-time writer?
Not really, because I mean, I was working full time, well, 5 days a week, in an office,
Yeah.
or 6 days, well, not 6 days, but some 5 days within the six at the public libraries for 7 years. But usually, I mean, the libraries would give, because of the shifts, they would often give me, a morning to write in, and so I would tend to do it then. I mean, what I do now is every day, 7 days a week. I'll be here at this desk about 6 in the morning or so, and go from there. But then I couldn't, no, so I had to to fit it in when I could, and it was a bit of a fits and starts process, and that did tend to cause more snagging.
Mhm.
I mean, I suppose I could have found time to do it every day, but I'm not good at writing in the evenings. I'm much better in the morning. So
Yeah.
I guess I could have got up early and before I went to work and done a bit. Didn't ever occur to me that, but no. Basically, you're right. The answer is no. Not back then. No.
It's difficult if you're trying to do it around full-time work hours
Mm.
and your other
Yes.
priorities and stuff.
Yes.
Back then, before you made any money at all writing, did you ever think, like, see yourself in this position going forward?
No. No. I just wrote the stuff and hoped somebody might want to buy it, but no. It was only. I mean, it's only 11 years after my first short story was published that I thought, well, maybe I could do this full time. And actually, this was a particular reason why. My second book had just come out from Arkham House, then, Demons by Daylight,
Mhm.
and Ted Klein, a great writer of horror fiction, is The Ceremonies, Dark Gods. He was then. He hadn't then been published much. He became much more famous later on. But he did an essay for a little magazine about Demons by Daylight, and he was this guy from New York. I'd never met him, never corresponded with him, and it was like, I don't know, 3,000-4,000 words, the critique, and he got everything that I'd wanted to be in the book. So I felt, well, okay, I have communicated then. I can do it basically.
Mhm.
And so I said to Jenny, maybe I should go full time. And she was teaching. She taught for a long time. And basically said, well, you've got to try it, do it now before we have children. So
Mhm.
I duly did, June 73, I duly stepped off into the void. And if Jenny hadn't been teaching, well, she basically kept us for 5 years.
Oh,
Before I really started making a decent amount when The Parasite came out. That was a kind of turning point. Not a very good book, but it did do well commercially.
oh, she sounds very supportive.
She
Yeah.
is. Oh, you bet. In all sorts of ways. Best thing
I
in my life.
Oh, she's lovely. I spoke to her very briefly at one
Yes,
of the conventions. Yeah, so it's nice to see you together,
yes.
because you don't normally see like wives, husbands, partners at those conventions. So it's
It's funny because there probably are quite a number in horror. Stephen Tabby King. There
yeah.
was Bob and Bob and Ellie Block,
Mhm.
Peter and Susie Straub.
Yeah.
And Dennis and Christina Etchison. There's a fair number.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's more in this field than in others, but there's quite a number of. I mean, I think more just than that. Marriages that have lasted a long time. I
Mhm.
mean, in Jenny's and my case, since 1971.
Oh wow. Oh, that's lovely. It's really wholesome.
Is it? Well, we're not that wholesome. Don't ruin my reputation.
But wholesome, but in a horror way,
Ah,
everyone.
yes, okay, fair enough.
I have some fan and audience questions to ask you, but I have one more of my own before we get
Okay,
there.
okay.
I was wondering, in terms of your reading preferences, do you like to read in the same sort of horror subgenres as you write, like folk horror or supernatural?
Yes, in the main and psychological, but I mean, obviously that's a pretty big, stretch anyway. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'll read. I mean, I will read stuff more graphic than I get. I mean, well, the obvious instance is good old Clive Barker. Because I raved about the Books of Blood from the outset because we showed them before they were published. And so I mean, Clive is more explicit than I tend to get, but I mean, his explicitness is I've always said this, his explicitness feeds the imagination, enriches it, rather than substitutes for the imagination. So I have that anytime. Or some of Joe Lansdale, the Night Runners, for instance. I mean, Joe's got somewhat more restrained later on, but well, he's a great writer anyway, whatever he does. But yes, no, I read. I suppose generally, in broad terms, I probably read more of the kind of area that I write in than others. And I mean, more than any, cosmic horror is my great love. Like when I can find it, and there's quite a lot of it about these days, I think.
I think it's making a comeback.
Yes.
I receive a lot of review requests for the website, and I've seen a lot of cosmic horror coming in recently, which I'm delighted by, because I felt like there was a patch where there wasn't so much of it.
Yeah. Have you read The Fisherman, John Langdon?
No, it's
Oh,
on shelf.
Oh, do read that for certain. Yes, oh yeah.
Oh, good. I'll bump it to the top of my pile.
Yeah, that Ballad of Black Tom, Victor Laval.
No, I don't have that.
Oh, very good, very good. You should grab it. Yes,
I'll write that down.
Yeah. When I start doing this, I'm always afraid. Well, more than afraid. I'll leave other people out, which obviously you do because there's so much of it out. Because I genuinely believe, that we're in something of a golden age of horror these days. There's so much good stuff. I can't begin to keep up. I'm amazed even Steve Jones has given up best horror now, best new horror, I beg your pardon. But, Ellen Datlow still somehow manages to do it, so.
I know.
Heaven knows how.
I don't know how she does it, because I tried to compile a list of my favorite books from last year, and I did have a few that were like stand out for me, but it was very different. I looked through everything I'd read. I thought, I don't know. I don't know who to mention. I don't want to leave anyone out. Everything.
No, exactly. That's right. That's right.
This is my last question before I get to the audience ones, and you're going to think this is silly, Ramsey, but...
Oh, no, go on.
I'm asking everyone this question, and I have more faith that you might know what this is.
Oh, don't go. Oh, hello.
Do you know what this is?
To be honest, no. I mean, I would have thought it was a gonk, but I'm probably wrong.
If you after we stop recording, if you hang around, I'll tell you what it is. I'm offering a prize to anyone that knows what that is.
Oh, fair enough. Okay.
But it's a peculiarity from my childhood.
Ah, right.
I'll show you what it is when we finish recording.
All right.
No one yet that I've interviewed has had any idea what that is. So let's move on to some more serious questions. I was asked by someone on Instagram to ask you what makes a great horror antagonist in your opinion?
Well, I suppose it depends on which sort we're thinking of, doesn't it? Because I mean, you can have your completely inhuman monster, in which case I think it's a sort of the more monstrous the better. I think I mean, it wouldn't necessarily have much of a personality. But if we're talking about the human kind, then I think complexity of character, some depth and nuance. Now, I mean, I constantly come back to this one because it's my all-time favorite horror movie, Night of the Demon. Or in America, Curse of the Demon, but Dana around as Peggy Cummins. And that has Neil McGuinness as Carswell, the occultist. I really think that is one of the great performances of British cinema, never mind horror film. And enormous amounts of detail and nuance to that character. As much as in much less generic cinema. So that would be my answer to that one.
Alrighty. Someone else asked, what is the point of horror literature for you?
Imagination. Basically, engaging and enlivening the imagination. And basically, I mean, I suppose most of all, I love the uncanny, whether it's a sort of ghostly all the way up to the cosmic. But that's my particular thing. The whole sense of something. Something beyond what we experience on the one hand, or something larger than the narrative can directly show. That kind of thing for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think everyone has a different answer to that question, or like, why do you read horror, write horror? I think I read it myself because the world is quite scary, and if you look,
Yes.
it can seem terrible, but if you just emerge from a really horrifying novel, it doesn't seem that bad.
No, that's true. Oh, just completely off the cuff here. Well, for you and for anybody, do you have the Shudder channel on your television at all?
I don't, but I was thinking about subscribing to that because that's.
I think it's worth doing. And it sort of vaguely relates to what you've just said, but there's a movie called Speak No Evil. It's a Scandinavian film, which starts as a kind of comedy of embarrassment, but then goes to places. Well, me anyway, and Jenny really wished it wouldn't. And I mean, it's one of the very few films of late that's actually left me genuinely shaken at the end. When it was over, we kind of looked at each other and didn't say much for a while. Basically, I'll say no more than that. But it's in a way, although in a sense, I suppose it's kind of reflecting the horror of the world in a way, but not in an obvious way. It's very inventive, but possibly in ways you don't want. So Speak No Evil, that's the movie.
Well, that's a high endorsement. I've just bumped that straight to the top of the list of things I want to watch this weekend.
Yes. Well, I mean, to be honest, the only director who really terrifies me on occasion, on a gut level, is David Lynch. And half a dozen of his films do it for sure.
I'm finding that Ari Aster, that did Hereditary and Midsummer, is having that effect on me.
Yes, I should say that too. And have you seen Beau is Afraid?
No.
Beau is Afraid. Oh, please do. Oh, his new one, his most recent one.
Oh, I didn't know he had a new one. Oh my goodness.
Yes, it's only recently out, and it's 3 hours long. And well, Martin Scorsese described it as being a 3-hour panic attack, and I think that's a pretty good summation. But I'd say that certainly the first section of it particularly, it's the greatest nightmare comedy or comedy of paranoia I've ever seen in the cinema. It's just astounding, and like really nothing else. But I mean, you like The Grin of the Dark. I think you may, in a very, very, very general way, see a sort of affinity between the two.
Ooh, oh gosh, yeah, you're filling up my my film watching
Sorry
slot
about
for the
this,
weekend.
yes.
No, I'm delighted. I can never find anything I want to watch these days, so
Fair enough.
it's
Okay.
good. Somebody asked, which of your books would you recommend as a first read for someone who's new to your work?
Maybe the trilogy, perhaps. The Searching Dead, Born to the Dark, and The Way of the Worm. But I mean, that's perhaps a bit self-regarding of me, because I'm saying buy 3 books, not just one. But I mean, I do think in many ways that kind of does a lot of things that I want to do. So it sort of it manages to encompass the very personal and I hope the cosmic as well. But if you just want a single, well, maybe Fellstones, which I think is a much more succinct kind of cosmic novel, or The Lonely Land, which is kind of a personal novel in its way. And a lot of people seem to like that. And that is a case, I think, it's very much about grief and loss, as well as very much being about the supernatural. I hope it delivers on that front, where people seem to think that it does on both. So So maybe, yeah, let's forget the trilogy then. So maybe Fellstones or The Lonely Lands.
I really liked The Lonely Lands.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
I thought it was very deep. It, yeah, I really enjoy books that have me thinking about them for a long time afterwards.
Yeah. Oh, yes, for sure. Yes.
And I read so much that I know it's a special book if I'm still thinking about it 10 books later.
Oh, gosh,
You know?
yes, yes, for sure.
I wish I could say that the age of the person that asked this was young, but if I know that he's in his late 30s, but he really wants to know what your favorite dinosaur is.
Well, when I say I grew up with them, I'm not that old, but what I mean is, I used to love dinosaurs when I was a kid. Well, I think it's got the old Tyrannosaurus, he's the old thunder lizard. Yes, no, he's the one for sure. Yeah.
I know a 4-year-old that would disagree with you on that, Ramsey. He thinks the Brontosaurus should be the king of the dinosaurs.
Oh, he's pretty good too. Yes, you bet.
Who are your favorite authors or books of the moment?
Oh, hell's teeth! That's what I dread.
I know.
Well, okay. Right now, I'm reading Paul Tremblay, horror movie, which isn't out yet. So they sent me a copy to do a quote for, and I certainly shall. It's definitely a Paul Tremblay, put it that way. It's very devious. I won't ruin it, but it's about the making of a cult horror movie, and it's told by the guy who plays, in some way, the monster. And what happens to him after that. I mean, I'm far enough in to know that far worse is going to happen before we get to the end. That's for certain. It is genuinely disturbing in a way that Paul can be. What else did I read recently? Small Mercies by Dennis Lehane. Now, a favourite writer of ours, a crime novelist. I mean, I suppose best known for. Mystic River and Shutter Island, of course, Scorsese film that. Although that was closer to a horror movie, actually, a horror novel.
Yeah.
But Small Mercies is a very harrowing crime novel set in Boston, like nearly all of his stories are, and set in the era of busing, forced busing, basically, from racial sharing from school to school. The enormous amount of opposition to it in Boston at the time, and this is the background of what happens in the novel. And again, I found this quite a bit with Lehane, in the best way, but still, there are moments when you think, no, I really hope that won't happen or hasn't happened. And of course it has, and he can be pretty confrontational. I met him very briefly once. Another case there. He's a very pleasant guy. I met in Spain. We were both guests at a convention there. I wish I'd known him better. Well, he's still there. He's still alive, and he says it's his last novel. But don't you do that, Dennis. Write another one.
Yes, Dennis. You've been told.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I find horror authors are always the nicest people, despite all the horrific things they write. When I met Tim Levin, I was just thinking, you've ended the world several horrible ways, and he's like, hello.
Yes, that's right. Well, that's part of the fun, isn't it? You can do that. Yeah. I mean, in a way, I suppose I did that in The Way of the Worm, although perhaps not quite. But depending on what you think happened.
I think purging all of the horrible ideas in novels is what keeps you all so nice.
Yes, I think Bob Bloch used to say that, I think. Yes, that's right.
Okay, I'm in good company with that opinion then.
I think so.
I think I should probably let you go, Ramsey. I've kept you for an hour already, and I could keep going probably for the entire day, but I think I've taken it up.
Don't worry. Well, perhaps we should do it again sometime.
Yes, I would. Yes, when your new novel comes out, which is, I want to bring this up, Ramsey has a new novel called The Incubations.
It is indeed, coming in November.
The 12th of November. I will put the pre-order link in the description for anyone who's interested, and you should all be interested. I'm going to pre-order it immediately. Very excited to read it. Can you tell us a little bit about that before we sign off?
Yes, it's about twin towns basically, one in Germany, one in England, and our central character goes to visit the one in Germany because he's had a correspondence that started at school with someone who lives there. But when he returns to England, he brings back with him some dreadful thing from Alpine legend, which then gets loose around him and incubates, as the title implies.
Ooh. Oh, I'm so excited. I'll have to keep going with some of your back catalogue that I haven't got to yet. In the meantime,
I think you said, Kaylee, you're reading the Three Stooges book.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
There will be a review up on Happy Go Horror the second I finish that. I'm enjoying it.
Thank you very much. Well, you see, I don't know if you've got to this yet, but this is the book that proves that Stanley Kubrick's movie The Shining is really a Three Stooges tribute.
I I love that because there are so many theories about what The Shining actually is about. So yes, I'm enjoying it so far, and there will be quite the detailed review when I've finished reading it. Ramsey also writes non-fiction for people who might not know, so you do have a collection of non-fiction works as well that I go to work my way through. But this is my first of your non-fiction books, so I'm gonna backtrack through them when I'm done with this one.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, The Incubations, a new novel out 12th of November this year. Thank you once again, Ramsey, for being here. I really appreciate you coming to talk to me.
Oh, okay. Thank you for having me. Great to see you again.
It's been a pleasure. If you stay there when I hang up, I'm going to explain to you what this is.
All right.
But for everyone else, we will sign off and bye. See you next time.
Bye, folks. Bye-bye. Bye.